NACDL is the association of the nation's criminal defense bar.
All right, well, thanks so much, Stasia. It is an absolute honor to be here today for both Steve and me, talking about a subject that's very near and dear to our hearts, which is false confessions, right? And how to litigate these cases, how to understand, how to tell the story of what happens inside the interrogation room. So how did I come to this subject? Brendan Dassey's case was actually the first interrogation video that I ever watched. This was 11 and a half years ago. I watched Brendan's interrogation video right after he'd been convicted. I brought it home. I sort of sat down on my couch, popped in these videos that later, many years later, became part of Making a Murderer. And I watched the interrogation of this 16-year-old, intellectually limited boy who was being accused of murder. And my heart broke, right? It's a moment of outrage when you see the manipulative tactics that are being used against someone like Brendan, or anyone, in the interrogation room. And I know that every single one of us in this room have had similar moments of outrage, right? Representing our own clients who've confessed, whether you have a video or not, right? Maybe you've represented a kid who is questioned without a lawyer present, without a mother present, despite asking for one. Maybe you've represented somebody who's intellectually limited, who's just obviously being manipulated during the interrogation, can't understand how to invoke Miranda, doesn't understand that by confessing, he or she is actually going to get into serious trouble. Or maybe you've represented somebody who's not young, who's not limited, who's a sort of average functioning person, who still feels the heat of interrogation, who still feels the power of all these psychological tactics that Iris just talked about, and who's maybe lied to about the evidence, lied to about what's going to happen if he or she confesses and commits this act of legal suicide, which is confessing in the interrogation room. We've all felt those moments of outrage. So one of the exciting things for me about Making a Murderer is that the world felt those moments of outrage too, right? Because you don't have to be a lawyer to understand that what goes on in the interrogation room, what is blessed way too often by the courts, is wrong, right? I mean, this is one of the amazing things to see the way in which folks have rallied around the way Brendan was questioned. Folks have demanded change, cried out on his behalf, and demanded that the way that questioning happens be reformed. So that's one of the things that I want to talk about today and that Steve wants to talk about today. These moments of outrage that we can find in almost any confession case, the deep manipulation, deception, trickery that happens too often in the interrogation room. How do you take those moments that we've all felt and turn them into a story that will make it understandable, relatable even, for a fact finder to see why was this interrogation coercive, right? Why did this person confess? What were those pressures? How do those moments of outrage combine to overbear someone's will? So I want to start today by showing you a few of those moments that you may remember, if you've seen it, from Making a Murderer, from Brendan Dassey's interrogation. Some of the moments that we still hear about from people all over the world when they remember what they saw in Brendan's case. And I know, again, that all of us have had cases that echo this, right? The first moment that we often hear about from people, right, is this moment from the interrogation. Of course, this is a murder case in Wisconsin. 2006 was this interrogation. Brendan's being questioned about the murder of a young woman named Teresa Halbach. And the officers know, or they believe they know, based on the forensic evidence, that she had been shot in the head. And so they're questioning Brendan about this murder, right? And of course they want him to describe the way in which this murder happened, right? They want him to talk about shooting her in the head. So I want to show for you how that part of the interrogation goes when they're trying to get Brendan to explain to them how Teresa Halbach was killed.
Where did he stab her?
In the stomach.
What else did he do to her? He did something else, we know that. What else?
He tied her up.
We know he did something else to her. What else did he do to her?
He choked her.
What else did he do to her? We know something else was done. Tell us. Or what else did you do? Come on. Something with the head. Brendan?
Yeah.
What else did you guys do? Come on.
What he made you do, Brendan, we know he made you do something else.
What was it? What was it?
We have the evidence, Brendan. We just need you to be honest with us.
That he cut off her hair.
Okay, what else?
What else was done to her head?
That he punched her.
What else? What else?
He made you do something to her, didn't he? So he would feel better about not being the only person, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What did he make you do to her?
What did he make you do, Brendan? It's okay. What did he make you do?
Cut her.
Cut her where?
On her throat.
What else happens to her in her head?
Extremely, extremely important you tell us this. For us to believe you.
Come on, Brendan. What else?
We know, we just need you to tell us.
That's all I can remember.
All right, I'm just going to come up and ask you. Who shot her in the head?
He did.
Why didn't you tell us that?
So I couldn't think of it.
Right? Remember that? This is the moment of moral outrage, right? This kid trying desperately to confess to a murder and not being able to accurately describe how it happened, despite all kinds of guesses, until they finally tell him she was shot in the head, right? So there's another moment of moral outrage that the public reacted to with making a murderer, right? And this is the part that happens at the end of the interrogation, after Brendan confesses to murder and sort of agrees, yeah, we shot her in the head. After he also confesses or agrees that they sexually assaulted this woman before shooting her in the head. So after this whole confession is made, right, he's placed under arrest, he asks to go back to school, right? Do you guys remember this moment too? Asking to go back to school after confessing to rape and murder. And I'm just gonna show you a quick clip of that moment too.
Am I gonna be at school before school ends?
Probably not. I mean, we're at 2:30 already. And school's over at what, 3?
3:05.
3:05, yeah. No.
What time will this be done?
Well, we're pretty much done. we may have a couple follow-up things to ask you, but it's pretty much done. You do understand you're under arrest now?
So could I call my girlfriend and tell her that I couldn't come today?
We'll give you an opportunity to do that. Okay? Did you kind of, I mean, honestly, after telling us what you told us, you kind of figured this was coming? Yeah?
This is only for one day, or where am I going?
Where do you think you're going?
I don't know.
You're going to juvie. That's where you're going. To a juvie jail. About 45 minutes away.
Yeah, but I got a question.
What's that?
What happened if he says something, like his story is different, but he says he admits to doing it?
What do you mean?
Like, if his story's like different, like, I never did nothing or something.
Did you? Huh?
Not really.
What do you mean, not really?
They got to my head.
Okay, so that's the other moment of outrage, right? Brendan asking to go back to school after he's confessed to rape and murder. Then when he is placed under arrest, told it's not just going to be for one day, told he's being brought to juvie jail, and the reality of the situation sinks in. He tells his mother, I did not really do this. They got to my head, right? So, these are outrageous. These are outrageous moments, and they don't just happen in this case. They happen all the time in all of our cases. So what we want to talk about today is transforming these moments that make you want to jump through the screen, right? How to transform these moments of moral outrage into a story, into an argument that will make sense, that will be relatable for a fact finder, right? How do we take these visceral moments that resonate with folks all around the globe, ordinary folks, non-lawyers, and turn them into an argument for suppression of a confession and, if needed, for acquittal at trial, right? How do we tell the story of this interrogation, contextualizing these moments for a fact finder against the backdrop of a specific case? How do we tell, as we like to say, how do we tell the story of the steamroll that is the inside of the interrogation room?
The story of the steamroll. The story was never told in Brendan Dassey's case. It was never told because his first attorney, Leonard Kaczynski, didn't think about the interrogation as a series of interviews. The interrogation actually began on February 27th. There was another interrogation on the 27th. There was an interrogation on the 27th in the evening, and then there was the interrogation that you all saw on Making a Murderer. And Len Kaczynski conceded that no Miranda rights were necessary for the first 3 interrogations, so he never challenged those, and he only focused on the final interrogation. And his trial attorneys never told the story. We're lucky today because we are increasingly entering a world where police officers are recording interrogations. At trial, Brendan's trial attorneys never once played the tape in their case in chief. They never used the tape to cross-examine the police officers when they were on the stand. The only time the jury saw the tape was in the beginning, the end of the state's case, where they played it straight through and then they stopped it 5 minutes before that scene that you just saw where Brendan's mother and he discuss. They never really got a chance to understand the coercion. So you have to explain to the jury the arc of interrogation. And what do I mean by that? Modern psychological interrogation techniques are meant to destroy a suspect's confidence that they will emerge from the interrogation process unharmed, to get them to a place of hopelessness where it becomes easier to manipulate them into accepting their fate. And what is that fate? That fate is they have no choice but to confess. And it's done in a variety of different ways. You've heard about them, some of them earlier, but there's a presumption of guilt, and you have to modify the suspect's incentives to make confession seem as though it's in the suspect's interest. How does it happen? Well, after a brief period of the wrong kind of rapport building, talking about sports, talking about school, talking about girls, maybe having the suspect talk about what they were doing in the day or the time period around the crime, the interrogator generally leaves the room and comes back into the room and accuses the suspect of committing the crime. It almost always begins with a lie. You know, we're not here to discuss whether you committed this crime. We already know that. We need to know why you committed the crime. There's a lot of deception involved. Sometimes it's specific, sometimes it's general. In Brendan's case, as you'll see, it was a more general kind of a lie. The tactics are manipulative and they're psychologically coercive. They essentially destroy the suspect's free will. So the confrontation often begins with an interrogator walking into the room with a file filled with papers. Doesn't have to be real papers. Could be Chinese takeout menus. Doesn't matter. But the notion is that this investigator has done a lot of research, talked to a lot of witnesses, and he knows what already happened in the case. Our investigation tells us that you stole the money. Doesn't have to be true. Oftentimes it's false. They're grasping at straws, but the suspect doesn't know that. Then they interrupt the suspect's denials. And over a period of time, if you try to assert your innocence and you keep getting interrupted and redirected by an interrogator, you're going to move off of that position. Sometimes it takes minutes, sometimes it takes hours, but the notion is that resistance is futile. And when that point comes across, the suspect will generally make an inculpatory admission. Doesn't have to be a confession. Doesn't have to even be, I did it. It could be, I was a witness. I was there. I saw something. Something that puts them into the action of the crime. And then what happens is police officers give them two choices. This is where the minimization and the psychological theme comes into play. And this is one choice, paints the suspect in a much more favorable light. It was an accident. It was impulsive, not deliberate. The woman in a rape case gave consent. There's usually, I did this exact same thing when I was younger, versus you're a cold, calculating monster who deliberated about this, doesn't care what happens to the victim, and is going to put the victim through the pain of a trial. Who would you rather be? The person who owns up and accepts responsibility, or the person who absolves themselves of any responsibility when everybody knows they were guilty? Once the confession begins to leak out, the way in which you can tell a true confession from a false confession is whether or not the person can provide details that the police did not already know, or provide details that fit the narrative that the crime scene evidence tells us all. And the best evidence is if they can lead police to evidence that they had not yet gathered. Once a suspect makes that inculpatory admission, the way to tell whether or not they're innocent or guilty is by the details of their story. And the innocent suspect can't come up with accurate details. He may get some right, or she may get some right. Maybe they were there when the body was found. Maybe they know the makeout of the house or the layout of the house because they've been in the house before. But they can't get the really important details right. And the difference, what makes false confessions so powerful, is that when you look at them, they have these details in them. How did they get there? Because of videotaped interrogations, we now know how they get there. They were led to these facts. These facts were fed to them by their police officers. It happens through leading questions, but it also happens by showing the suspect crime scene photos, taking the client to the crime scene. Doesn't matter how it happens, but if you look at a videotape, you will see evidence of what we call police contamination. We're going to now talk about an interrogation and show you what this looks like in the context of a client that Laura and I worked on named Robert Davis.
Exactly. So we've talked about how interrogation works, right? This arc of interrogation, the reduction down to hopelessness, sometimes over the course of hours, and then the provision of this out, right? Are you going to be this monster or the person who just made the mistake, right? That's the arc of interrogation, down to hopelessness and then the out. And this is how interrogations work in almost every case, because officers are trained uniformly across all 50 states to use these techniques. So what we're going to do real fast is show you a case where this arc of interrogation and the coercive nature of it is quite easy in a way to pick out. It's quite intuitive. You can see exactly how this worked on someone. This is the case of Robert Davis. And we're going to talk about Robert Davis, and then we're going to go back to Brendan's case, right? To use this pattern that we see in Robert Davis's interrogation, to tease it out of Brendan's interrogation, and show you how to contextualize these moments of moral outrage around the story of the way interrogation works and can coerce. So Robert Davis is a case from Virginia, from Crozet, Virginia, which is a town about 10 minutes or so outside of Charlottesville. This was 2003. Robert was 18 years old, living in Crozet with his mother. He was a high school student, and he lived on a street in Crozet called Kling Lane. It's February, it's the middle of winter, there's a snowstorm one night, and in the middle of the snowstorm, in the middle of the night, another one of the houses on Kling Lane goes up in flames, right? The fire department shows up, it's a huge house fire, puts out the fire, takes a long time to put out the fire. And then the firefighters go inside the home once they get the fire under control. And they go upstairs to where some of the bedrooms are. And they find the body of a woman named Nola Charles. And they find a knife in her back. Turns out she's been stabbed and beaten with a blunt instrument, and the fire was quite clearly set to cover up her murder. They go down the hallway and they also find the body of her 3-year-old son who died of smoke asphyxiation. The 2 older daughters who lived in the downstairs, whose bedrooms were on the downstairs of the house, they were able to get out in time. So what we have is an arson and a double murder. So the officers, of course, begin doing their investigation. Quite soon they come across 2 suspects, people who also lived on the street, Rocky and Jessica Fugit. They're teenagers. They were friends with one of Nola's daughters, also a teenager. Jessica had some mental illness that she struggled with. And quite soon, it becomes quite clear in this investigation that Wendy had sort of complained about her mother, as all teenagers do. She won't let me wear what I want to wear. She won't let me hang out with who I want to hang out with. And Jessica and Rocky took matters into their own hands and ended up attacking Wendy's mother. So this all comes out, and it's quite clear and reliable. Rocky and Jessica give confessions that we would say are reliable because they were able actually to lead the police to a snowy field in town where the pipe that had been used to bludgeon Nola Charles was found. Her DNA was on it, sort of case closed when it comes to Rocky and Jessica. But while they're questioning Rocky and Jessica, they ask them, who else did this with you, right? Rocky and Jessica are teenagers themselves, they're in high school, and they start rattling off a long list of other kids from their high school who they didn't get along with. It's like 6 or 7 names, boom, 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 boom. And the last name was Robert Davis. So the police investigate these names, this list of purported accomplices, and one by one they can cross them off the list because they all have alibis, right? Not you, not you, not you, not you. And then they get to Robert. He's the last one on the list. Robert did not have a great alibi. It was the middle of the night. He was at home sleeping, and his mom was not home. So not a great alibi. So the police bring him in for questioning in the middle of the night, out of the blue. He's 18 years old, fully functioning guy, no limitations. They bring him in for interrogation. They do tape it. The interrogation starts at about 2 in the morning, and it runs until about 7 in the morning for Robert, okay? And I want to show you how this interrogation went so that you can see this arc of interrogation that Steve talked about and how it played out in Robert's case. So let's start at the beginning.
Do the other thing. Don't turn around.
Yep, just face it away from me.
And then if you would do the same thing with your other hand, take 2 steps forward and put your hands down at your side.
Just go ahead and tell Robert what his charge with.
Robert, you're charged with the murder of Nola Charleston, of Thomas Charles. You're going to be charged with the attempted murder of the 2 Charles daughters, Katie and Wendy. You're charged with breaking and entering with the intent to commit larceny at the nighttime as well. You're charged with robbery. Now it's really gotten serious, hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
Exactly right. And you would not be charged with that, Robert, if we didn't have reason to believe or know that you were in that house during the time that the things took place in that house. Now this is the time right here, Robert, where you need to step up and say what you saw, what happened, because we already got most of it. And I tell you what, if you will speak for yourself, then you're in that house by yourself and doing everything yourself. And you're going to get the blunt.
I'm not gonna lie to you.
And start telling the truth.
I am telling you the truth. I am telling you the truth. I had nothing to do with this. I swear to God, I swear to God all my life right now that I did not do nothing of this matter. I had nothing to do with this. I will take a polygraph test right now to prove to you that I did not have nothing to do with this. You know, and I know that I'm not capable of doing something like this. I did not kill nobody. I cannot even kill a fucking fly, man.
Okay, so this is how it started for Robert, right? This is the moment of accusation that Steve talked about, right? You're being charged with the murder of Nola Charles. And Robert reacted the way I think any of us would, right? If we didn't do it and we were in that situation, what are you talking about? I couldn't possibly do this. Can I take a polygraph test? How can I prove my innocence? He acts just the way that anybody would in that situation. So how do they move him off that position? How do they move him off his innocence? Well, let's see.
And do the other thing. Don't turn around.
Yep, just face it away from me.
And then if you would do the same thing with your other hand, take 2 steps forward and put your hands down at your side.
Do you know your skin is the worst thing in the world as far as dust? You can't even see it. Dust is made of most of us human thin skin. That can be picked up, that DNA. That stuff right there, if you touched anything, the glove part can be picked up and match with the shirt. The same thing with the gloves. I can match it to exactly what you wore. Then I understand what you were. You were there. The evidence shows you were there. The evidence shows you. I can't lie about the evidence.
Exactly, right? So this is the false evidence ploy that Iris talked about. Of course there's no DNA at the scene, right? There's no evidence tying Robert to this arson or this murder at all. But they tell him that there is. And this is part of this process of moving him off innocence, of breaking him down to a point of hopelessness, right? We found your DNA at the scene. No one is going to believe you because we've got DNA, right? And of course, then they lie to him about lying, which is like one of my favorite parts of this interrogation, right? You're just like, how can he possibly combat this, right? Okay, so they're bringing him down to hopelessness. So let's see the outs that they offer him.
And do the other thing. Don't turn way for me. And then if you would, do the same thing with your other hand, take 2 steps forward.
I told your mom that I would sit here and try to keep you from the most ultimate punishment you can get. And I'm trying to do that, and you're not even helping me to help you. I can't do no more. I can't speak for you, son. Only way you can get out of this is by talking the truth and saying you're a part of it. And the thing is, you're not going to get out of it, Robert. I'm not going to lie to you. You're not going to get out of it. But you might save your life. And the thing is, if you don't come out and tell the truth and admit to whatever part you did, then when we go to a criminal judge, I can't say that you cooperated, and they're going to put you away for 90 years. You tried to go 90 years, if not worse. And if you cooperate, the judge is in control. The judge looks at a guy and goes, man, he cooperated. He didn't cooperate. There's a lot of people in this house. A lot of people have different roles. If you were just in the house, that's one thing. Standing guard or something. One thing. Being in the house is one thing. Doing other things is another thing. Let's establish. Let's do this. Don't. We know you were there. We know you were there.
I was not there.
It's not that big of a deal. If you were just in the house, Rob, that's not that big a deal.
I was not in the house. If you cooperate with me, then I can work with the Commonwealth and say that you cooperate with me. But son, if you don't cooperate with me, then I can't do that. And then I can't tell your mom that I can save you from the ultimate. I start telling your mom the truth and trying to help your mom. I can't do that. I can't tell her honestly. I can save Robert because Robert won't work with me. And I was killing me on that phone back there. Your mom is upset. She loves you, Robert, no matter what. She's loving you. And I'm doing the best to try to keep that family tie alive. No matter what you've done, she said, I still love him. He's my son. No matter what he's done. And I said, Sandra, I know. And I'm trying to get him to work with me. If he works with me, I will do everything I can to help you see him and get through this. But if I can't do that, I can't do that without him telling me the truth.
So they brought Robert down to hopelessness, right, by telling him that they found his DNA at the scene, right? No one's going to believe these things you're saying about being innocent. And then they clearly offer him a choice, right? The choice is the ultimate punishment if you don't cooperate. And of course, this is Virginia, so what does that mean? Death, right? Death if you don't cooperate. Maybe 90 years in prison. But if you do cooperate, then we can go to the judge and we can say, this is the kind of guy who cooperates, right? Just as Steve said, this is someone we can work with, right? Things are going to be okay. Maybe you're the kind of guy who's just in the house. We just need to hear this from you, right? This is the choice that he is given once he's been reduced down to hopelessness. This is the arc of interrogation. So this works on Robert over a period of hours, right? This process works. He realizes that he's screwed and chooses to cut his losses by confessing. In Robert's case, though, he wasn't there. So how does he know what to say about this crime? Well, much like Brendan Dassey, these officers tell him what to say.
Just face that way for me. And then if you would, do the same thing with your other hand, take 2 steps forward.
What can I say that I did to get me out of this? I held her down when they tied her up. Yeah. And then I hit her 2 times. Because they said if I didn't hit her, it would be...
Wait a minute, I got somebody else clubbing her, Robert. I got someone else doing that act. You did another act. You know what that act is. And we know. And that's the thing that has something on it that's yours.
What would that be?
Robert, I'm going to come straight out and tell you what I'm getting. All right? Since you're not going to tell me. All right? You did another act. All right? You did another act to that lady. And you can sit here and say, oh, I got 3 other stories telling me what you did. And why you keep not wanting to say it, because either way, clubbing or doing the other act are the same thing. except the fact you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I don't know exactly what you're talking about.
Did you, and I'm gonna ask you, I'm gonna bring it out as a question, and but I know the answer. Did you or did you not stab that woman?
No. I would not lie to you about that. I did not stab her. I had the knife, though, and I don't know if it stabbed her or not, but I didn't stab her. If I did, I didn't mean to.
You know what you did, and you stabbed that woman.
I stabbed her.
We are really going out on a limb here with you. Would it make you feel better if we told you
Yes, I
exactly who was with you?
Yes, I would, because I can tell you who I hang out with, and I can tell you that I would not hang out with these people because I don't want to.
But you know that kind of defeats the purpose, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you understand that? Is whenever we have to start telling you what you already know. But if that helps you, maybe we can do that.
Okay, so this is very, very reminiscent of the moment of outrage in Brendan's interrogation, right? I'm just going to come out and ask you who shot her in the head. Same thing, right? I've got you doing another act, right? Do I have to tell you what it is? You stabbed her. It's the same thing, the same pattern that we see. And this is sort of the pinnacle moment of this arc of interrogation. He's been brought down to hopelessness. He's been given his choice, right? Death if you continue denying. Cooperation, judge will like you if you admit. He decides to admit, and then he repeats the facts that are given to him. Just want to show you one other quick clip, and then I'm going to give it back to Steve. This is from the very, very end of Robert Davis's interrogation, after he confesses in full.
Do the other thing. Don't turn around. Just raise that away from her. And then if you would, do the same thing with your other hand. Take a few steps forward.
Do you think by me telling you this is what you're doing
Tonight?
Today?
Today, I doubt it.
Today you done it?
Now, you'll see a judge Monday.
Why am I lying about all this to you, just so I can go home?
You're not lying.
I am lying to you. I am lying to you. Full front to your face. I am lying to you.
Moral outrage, right? Do we feel it? These are incredible moments. They're the moments that jump out at all of us when we watch these videos. But if you can weave them together into this kind of a story about how the manipulative pressures of interrogation coerced Robert Davis, that's the story that is relatable, that's understandable, that's compelling to a fact finder. Steve?
So if you go on the web and you search Laura Nirider and Robert Davis, you'll see Laura's first star turn as an expert in Robert Davis's case. It's a Dateline special. This is a case where Robert's trial lawyer did everything right. Everything right. He filed a motion to suppress. He litigated that motion to suppress. He highlighted the portions of the interrogation that told the story of coercion and contamination. And he lost. You're going to lose a lot of these motions, but you need to create a record when you do so, because when Laura and I and other post-conviction and appellate attorneys come back to try to right this wrong, it's almost impossible if you don't create a record. And Steve Rosenfield, Charlotte, Virginia, one of the best attorneys I know, created a record. Now, ultimately, what happened with Robert is he was given a choice. Because of Steve's work, they gave him a deal. Either you plead guilty and get 23 years, or you go to trial and you get either death or life imprisonment. And Robert took the deal. But that didn't stop Steve from continuing to work and work and work. And he developed new evidence of actual innocence. He contacted Laura and I. We wrote an expert report, and he was able to get clemency for Robert Davis and then a full and absolute pardon. So let's think about Brendan's case. You all, most of you, many of you have seen Making a Murderer. And like I said before, it's really a series of interrogations. And both of Brendan's attorneys ignored everything but March 1st. So the first interrogation takes place at the school. Brendan is tapped on the shoulder in his class. He's asked to accompany a teacher into the hallway. He's taken to a room, and in the room are Mark Wiegert and Tom Fassbender, two seasoned interrogators. And what you don't see in Making a Murderer is that in that initial interview, you see the original threat and the original promise. They tell Brendan, they say to him, look, Brendan, we've been investigating this case for a while, and there are people in the district attorney's office who are ready to charge you with this crime or the cover-up of it. And we told them no. Let us talk to the kid. Let us see what he has to say before you charge him. So there's a threat of charges hanging over his head. And then come the suggestions of leniency and the false friendship promises. We'll go to bat for you, Brendan. We're here to help you, Brendan. We're in your corner, Brendan. We're not going to let you leave you hanging high and dry, Brendan. We think that even if you tell us some things that might involve you in the crime, a little bit more, that you'll be okay, you'll be all right. Even if we fill in the blanks, you'll be okay, you'll be all right. None of that is in Making a Murderer. None of that was an emotion to suppress. None of that came out of Brendan's trial because his attorneys dropped the ball. So we're going to fast forward to March 4th. At the end of the interrogation on February 27th, they do get two admissions from Brendan. They get an admission that he was at a fire on the night of Teresa Halbach's disappearance with his uncle, Stephen Avery, and they get another important admission, which is again the product of leading and contamination. They get Brendan to admit that he saw some body parts in the fire. It's leading because they asked him over and over, Brendan, what did you see in the fire? Did you see a foot? Did you see a hand? Did you see her head? And Brendan says, I saw her forehead, I saw some toes, and I saw some fingers. Nonsensical. Some of Teresa Halbach's bones were found in that fire, a very small portion of her bones, but they needed Brendan to say that he saw her in the fire. Then they let him go. They put him they took him to a police station. They got him to repeat what he had just said. They took him to this resort, a local hotel, because it wasn't safe for him to go back home, apparently. And then they picked him up a couple of days later. But between the February 27th interview and the March 1st interview, they discovered something that they had suspected but didn't have proof of. They got a lab report saying that there was evidence that Teresa had been shot in the head. And that's why you see that evidence of contamination. So let's talk about Brendan. We talked about the false evidence ploy. In Brendan's case, it was what we call the omniscience ploy. And this is not a specific lie about a particular piece of evidence. It's a lie about how much the interrogators know and what they know about who's involved in the crime.
And we know, like Tom said, we reviewed those tapes. We know there's some things you left out. And we know there's some things that maybe weren't quite correct that you told us, okay? We've been investigating this a long time. We pretty much know everything. That's why we're talking to you again today. Why did he have you come over there? Did he need help with something? Remember, we already know, but we need to hear it from you. Why did he have you come over there? Brenda, were you there when this happened?
No.
Okay. Was she dead there then or not?
Yeah.
How do you know that? I have a feeling I know how you know that.
We already know, Brad. We already know. Come on, be honest with us. Be honest with us. We already know. It's okay.
Get your hands off my client's knee.
Come on, be honest. You went back into that room.
Don't let us down, Brendan.
We know you were back there. Let's get it all out today. This will be all over with. Brendan, be honest. You were there when she died. We know that. Don't start lying now. We know you were there. What happened?
We know you were there. We know you were in the room. We know you saw things. We already know, we already know, we already know, we already know. That's the omniscience ploy. Then come some things from the 27th and also earlier interrogations and on the 1st. These are suggestions and promises of help.
You've got people back at the sheriff's department, district attorney's office, that are looking at this now saying, there's no way that Brendan Massey is out there and they see something. And they're talking about trying to link Brendan Massey with this event. Not saying that Brendan did it, but saying Brendan had something to do with it or cover up of it, which would mean Brendan Massey could potentially be facing charges for that. We've gotten a lot of information. Some people don't care. Some people back there are saying, well, we'll just charge him. So no, let us talk about this. Not the opportunity to come forward with information that he has. Get it off of his chest. Make it look, you can make it look hard if you want.
But we want to go back and tell people that, Brendan told us what he knew. We want to be able to tell people that Brendan was honest. He's not like Steve. He's honest. He's a good guy. He's going to go places in this life. But in order for us to do that, you need to be honest with us. And so far, you're not being 100% honest.
Mark and I both want to go back to the feelings that you didn't do it. Yes, he was married to 4 or 5 years old. I can imagine how it's weighing on him. We'll understand that.
We'll go to bat for you. But you have to be honest with us.
Because Mark and I looked at the tapes, looked at the notes, and it's real obvious there's some places where some things were left out or maybe changed just a bit to maybe looking at yourself to protect yourself a little. From what I'm seeing, even if I fill those in, I'm thinking you're all right. Okay, you don't have to worry about things. We're there for you. And we know what Stephen did, and we know kind of what happened to you and what he did. We just need to hear the whole story from you. And as soon as we get that, we're comfortable with that, I think you're going to be a lot more comfortable with that. It's going to be a lot easier on you down the road if this goes to trial and stuff like that.
Honesty here, Brendan, is the thing that's going to help you. Okay, no matter what you did, we can work through that. Okay, we can't make any promises, but we'll stand behind you no matter what you did. Okay, because you're being the good guy here. You're the one that's saying, you know what, maybe I made some mistakes, but here's what I did. The other guy involved in this doesn't want to help himself. All he wants to do is blame everybody else. Okay, and by you talking with us, it's helping you. Okay, because the honest person is the one that's going to get a better deal out of everything. You know how that works. Honesty is the only thing that'll set you free.
So when you tell a kid like Brendan, and we're not going to go into the individual vulnerabilities piece because we don't have time. Brendan is a kid who has extraordinarily low aptitude with anything related to the verbal domain. His expressive language skills, his vocabulary, his memory are all in like the bottom 1 to 3% of the scores. Yes, he was in some regular classes, but that's because federal law requires that he be mainstreamed into classes and not segregated. But he was failing most of those classes. And so when you tell someone like Brendan who doesn't understand idioms that honesty will set you free, he believes it. He actually believes it, that if he confesses to murder and rape, that he'll be set free. We're going to skip this slide in the interest of time and go right to the contamination. Now, you saw the first instance of contamination in Laura's opening remarks. There were 3 critical facts that the police knew that had not been released to the public, okay? One was that Teresa had been shot in the head. The other was that Stephen Avery had gone underneath the hood of the car and disconnected the battery cables. Stephen's DNA was later found on a hood latch. And the third fact was, what happened to Teresa's possessions? What happened to her cell phone, her purse, her camera? If Brendan could tell them those unknown facts, you would have a pretty good belief that he was guilty. But look what happened. The bottom line is they lead him to the answers that they want him to have. So the 3 most critical unknown facts, he can't supply them himself. And through leading questions, they feed those facts to him. And then at trial, they trumpet the fact that he knew those facts as evidence of his guilt. So in the aftermath of Brendan's confession, you saw the first part of that when Brendan says they got to my head. But there's even more.
Am I going to be at school before school ends?
Probably not. I mean, we're at 2:30 already, and school's over at what, 3?
3:05.
3:05, yeah. No.
What time will this be done?
Well, we're pretty much done. You know, we may have a couple of follow-up things to ask you, but it's pretty much done. You do understand that you're under arrest now?
So could I call my girlfriend and tell her that I couldn't come today?
We'll give you an opportunity to do that.
So big of you.
Okay? Did you kind of, I mean, honestly, after telling us what you told us, you kind of figured this was coming? Yeah?
This is only for one day, or where am I going?
Where do you think you're going?
I don't know.
You're going to juvie. That's where you're going. To a juvie jail. About 45 minutes away.
Yeah, but I got a question.
What's that?
What would happen if he says something, like his story is different, but he says he admits to doing it?
What do you mean?
Like, if his story's like different, like, I never did nothing or something.
Did you? Huh?
Not really.
What do you mean, not really?
They got to my head.
Huh?
I didn't say anything.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that, Brendan? you pressuring him?
Who are you talking about?
Him,
What do you mean pressuring him?
when talking to him?
No, we told him we needed to know the truth. We've been doing this job a long time, Barb, and we can tell when people aren't telling the truth. And in my opinion, he'd never be able to live with it himself if he didn't tell somebody. There's no way he couldn't live with that. Nobody could live with that. And I think Brendan knows that.
Imagine how powerful that would have been to a jury. The one person who knows Brendan better than anybody else is interpreting what Brendan means by "they got to my head," right? She has the courage to ask these officers, were you pressuring him? But the defense attorneys in this case not only didn't play these 5 minutes where you see, as the confession looks like it might unravel, the police officers who are monitoring this in another room come rushing back in. They stipulated that it wasn't admissible. And the jury was deprived of this important moment that helps to tell the story. So what are the lessons? What are the takeaways of the Dassey case? Well, they're the same takeaways that Laura talked about in the Davis case. You have to understand and litigate commonly used police interrogation tactics. You have to read the Reed manual. You have to go on their website. You have to read the psychological research of Iris and other professors who are working in this field. You have to do some work because you have to understand and make the jury understand what is a complex psychological dynamic in ways that they can understand it. You have to make the sequence of these pressures clear, understandable, and relatable. You need to identify the accusations, the denials, the interruptions. You need to make the jury feel what it must feel like every time a police officer interrupts somebody when they're trying to assert their innocence. You need to identify the confrontation process used to bring the client down to hopelessness. You have to demonstrate that arc in action. And these days, more and more often, you can do that with a videotape. You have to find the minimizing theme, whether it's the help theme, or the we'll go to bat to you theme, or we're in your corner theme, or it's a theme that paints the two different alternatives, one which implies leniency and one which doesn't. Find that theme. Show the jury that theme. Call an expert like Iris or Richard Leo or someone else to explain what that theme does to a suspect. Call another expert if your suspect has vulnerabilities, if they have a low IQ or they're disabled or they're otherwise vulnerable, if they're young, and explain how these tactics land particularly hard on clients like your clients. Highlight the contamination and the fact feeding. 20 years ago when I used to do this lecture, I used to cart around Betamax and VHS tapes. And I didn't have a lot of them because at the time there were only 3 states that required electronic recording of interrogations. Today there are over 25. So more and more often, you're going to be able to have these recordings and you're going to learn how to have to use them and use them effectively. Not just at trial, but beginning at the earliest stages in the motion to suppress. You need to tell the story of the arc leading to hopelessness. You need to pick up on the research that Iris cited, which says that juries are troubled by this. They may convict anyway, but they are troubled by it, just as everyone who watched Making a Murder was troubled by it. And then you need to deliver a closing killer argument. And you may lose. Be prepared to lose. But if you do this, you are going to make the jobs of the lawyers who come after you that much easier. Thank you very much.